Don't lie to me, Aaliyah, please. I can take the distance. I can take the late nights at the gallery. But I cannot take the lying.
The leather seat of the luxury sedan felt like ice against the back of Aliyah's thighs, the cold seeping through the emerald velvet of her dress. It wasn't the temperature of the car. Julian had the climate control set to a sensible 72 degrees. It was the temperature of the silence. It was a suffocating, pressurized silence, the kind that exists only after a grenade has been thrown into a room, but hasn't yet detonated. Julian drove with a white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel. The passing streetlights rhythmically illuminated his jaw, which was set tight, grinding on words he was too polite to say. Beside him, Aliyah stared out the window, watching Seoul blur into streaks of neon and gray. She was physically present, buckled into the passenger seat, but her spirit was still back in that ballroom, trapped in the gravitational pull of a man with vines inked into his skin. Aliyah. Julian's voice broke the spell. It was soft, hesitant, laced with a fear he was trying desperately to hide. Aliyah didn't turn her head immediately. She needed a second to compose her face, to pull the mask of the successful gallery owner back into place. You haven't said a word since we left the hotel, he said, keeping his eyes fixed on the wet asphalt ahead. You drank that vodka like it was water. You practically ran out of the door. And your hand, it's shaking. Aliyah looked down. He was right. Her hands, resting in her lap, were trembling. She clasped them together, trying to still the nerves that were firing like downed power lines. I told you, Julian, I have a headache. The lights were too bright. The music was too cloying. Julian let out a breath, a sharp hiss of frustration that was entirely uncharacteristic of him. He pulled the car over to the curb, the tires crunching against wet leaves, and put it in park. The hazard lights clicked rhythmically, casting an intermittent orange glow over the interior, turning his face into a mask of tragedy. Don't lie to me, Aliyah, please. I can take the distance. I can take the late nights at the gallery, but I cannot take the lying. Aliyah finally looked at him fully. In the flickering light, Julian looked young. He looked safe. He looked like the life she was supposed to want: museum openings, Sunday brunches, a partner who communicated his feelings and never kept secrets. He was perfect on paper, and looking at him made her feel absolutely nothing but a crushing, suffocating guilt. I'm not lying, she whispered, though the words tasted like ash. Julian turned in his seat to face her. His expression wasn't angry. It was pained. It was the look of a man realizing he had been fighting a war he lost before he even stepped onto the battlefield. I saw the way you looked at him, Aliyah, the man with the tattoo, Jaewon's new boyfriend. Aliyah flinched at the description, Jaewon's boyfriend. The words hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. I looked at him because I was surprised, she deflected, her voice rising slightly in defense. I didn't know Jaewon was seeing anyone. It was a shock. Julian shook his head slowly, a sad smile playing on his lips. No, you didn't look at him with surprise. You looked at him like he was the only person in the room. You looked at him like you were terrified he would speak to you and terrified he wouldn't. He reached out, taking her hand. His skin was warm, dry, comforting. It lacked the electric charge, the dangerous heat that Diyun's touch carried. It felt like holding hands with a brother or a ghost. Did you leave the gala because you were sick, Aliyah? Julian asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Or did you leave because you couldn't stand seeing him with her? Aliyah pulled her hand away. The truth was a physical lump in her throat, choking her. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell Julian that he was right, that she was a fraud, that she was still in love with a man who had broken her heart to save her life. But she couldn't. Admitting it made it real. Admitting it meant she had to do something about it. I think you should take me home, Julian, she said, her voice trembling. Julian stared at her for a long moment, searching her face for the woman he had been dating for 2 months, the woman who laughed at his jokes and liked impressionist paintings. But she wasn't there. In her place was a stranger with haunted eyes, a woman who belonged to a story he wasn't part of. Okay, he said softly, the hope dying in his eyes. He put the car back in gear. Okay. The rest of the drive was silent, but the air had changed. It was no longer the silence of a grenade waiting to go off. It was the silence of a ruin after the explosion. Miles away, in a different car, the atmosphere was equally brittle, though the context was entirely different. Di-yun sat in the back of his armored SUV, staring at the privacy partition that separated them from the driver. Next to him, Jaewon was scrolling through her phone, the blue light illuminating her soft features. She was humming a soft tune, the waltz they had danced to, oblivious to the fact that the man beside her was currently tearing himself apart from the inside out. Di-yun's hands were resting on his knees. They were perfectly still, but the muscles in his forearms were coiled tight as steel cables. The tattoo on his neck felt hot, itching against his collar, a reminder of the beast he was trying to keep chained. He had held Jaewon, he had danced with her, he had smiled at the donors, and every second of it had felt like a betrayal. Not a betrayal of Jaewon, though it was that too, but a betrayal of himself. He had spent 3 months building a fortress of indifference, telling himself that Alia was better off, that she was safe, that he was poison to her. And then he had seen her. Green velvet, dark skin, eyes that looked at him with a mixture of hatred and longing that had nearly brought him to his knees in the middle of the ballroom. She wasn't safe. She was miserable. He had seen the way she drank the vodka, like medicine. He had seen the fake smile she plastered on for the museum director. He had given her up to give her a happy life, and all he had done was condemn them both to a purgatory of pretending. Day. Jaewon's hand touched his arm. He didn't flinch. He had too much discipline for that, but the effort it took not to pull away cost him everything. He turned to look at her. She was smiling, but her brow was furrowed with concern. "You're a million miles away," she said softly. "You've been quiet since we met Alia. Did she say something that upset you? I know she can be intense. She's been through a lot recently." Di-yun looked at Jaewon's kind, open face. She was innocence personified. She was the collateral damage in a war she didn't even know was being fought. "No," he lied, his voice a low rasp that sounded foreign even to his own ears. "She didn't say anything. I'm just tired, Jaewon, the business. It never sleeps." Jaewon studied him. She was an art therapist. Her job was to read the things people didn't say. She saw the tension in his jaw. She saw the darkness in his eyes that no amount of light could penetrate. She saw a man who was sitting next to her but looking at something she couldn't see. "You know," she said, sliding her hand down to clasp his, "you don't have to be strong all the time, Dee. Not with me. If there's something wrong, if there's something about the building or your family." "It is nothing," he cut her off, perhaps a little too sharply. He pulled his hand away under the pretense of adjusting his cuff, breaking the contact. "I need to make a call," he said, turning away from her warmth. "Security protocol." Jaewon pulled back, hurt flashing across her face before she masked it with a polite nod. "Okay." She turned back to the window, watching the rain streak the glass. Di-yun took out his phone, but he didn't dial anyone. He just stared at the black screen, seeing only the reflection of a man who was failing everyone he tried to protect. 3 days passed. The city was washed clean by the storm, leaving behind a crisp, biting autumn chill that seeped into the bones. Jaewon stood in the hallway of the gallery building. She had a bag of pastries, Alia's favorite almond croissants, and 2 coffees. She hadn't heard from Alia since the gala. Her texts had gone unanswered. Her calls went to voicemail. She told herself Alia was just busy. Post-gala exhaustion was real, but a nagging feeling in her gut, an intuition she usually reserved for her patients, told her something was wrong. The energy between Alia and Di-yun at the party hadn't been the polite friction of strangers or a landlord-tenant dispute. It had been the collision of planets. It had been heavy, personal. She knocked on the heavy glass door of the gallery office. It was unlocked. "Alia." No answer. Jaewon walked in. The office was a mess of papers and fabric swatches, typical for Alia in creative mode. But Alia wasn't there. Jaewon set the coffee down on the desk. As she did, her handbag snagged on a stack of sketchbooks precariously balanced on the edge of the table. They spilled onto the floor, fanning out in a chaotic spread. "Oh, clumsy," she muttered to herself, bending down to pick them up. She gathered the books, intending to stack them neatly. But as she picked up a leather-bound journal, it fell open to a page near the middle. Jaewon froze. It wasn't a sketch of a sculpture or a room layout. It wasn't a draft for the new exhibit. It was a charcoal portrait. It was a man, He was sleeping, his face relaxed in a way Jaiwon had rarely seen, his head resting on a pillow, the sheets rumpled around his shoulders. The shading was exquisite, tender. Every lash was detailed. But what stopped Jaiwon's heart was the neck. The artist had drawn the tattoo with painstaking accuracy. The vines, the thorns, the geometric patterns fatting into the skin. At the bottom of the page, in Alia's sharp, angular handwriting, was a date from 6 months ago, and a single sentence. Even in sleep, the king is at war. Jaiwon stared at the drawing. The date, 6 months ago. She met Di-yun 2 months ago. He told her he had been single for a long time. He told her he didn't know anyone in the art world. Alia. The pieces slammed together in Jaiwon's mind with the force of a physical blow. The intensity at the gala. The way Di-yun had looked at Alia, like a starving man looking at a feast he couldn't touch. The way Alia had looked so betrayed. The business transaction lie. Alia wasn't just an acquaintance. Alia was the ex. The complex relationship Alia had cried about, the heartbreak Di-yun was hiding. They were the ghosts haunting each other, and she was just the obstacle standing in the middle. She was the placeholder. A sound at the door made her jump. Alia stood there. She looked exhausted. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a coat she hadn't taken off, looking like she wanted to disappear. She held a set of keys, her knuckles white. She saw Jaiwon. Then she saw the sketchbook in Jaiwon's hands. Alia didn't gasp. She didn't run. She just slumped against the doorframe, as if the energy required to keep the secret had finally run out. Jaiwon, she whispered, the name cracking. Jaiwon looked at the drawing, then at her friend. Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady, fortified by a sudden, painful clarity. You lied to me, both of you. Alia walked into the room, taking her sunglasses off. Her eyes were red-rimmed, swollen from sleepless nights. I didn't know it was him, Jaiwon. Not until the gala, I swear to you. I thought you were dating an architect or a doctor. I didn't know. But you knew afterward, Jaiwon countered, her voice trembling. You knew when you ran away. You knew when you let me dance with him. You knew when you looked me in the eye and said you were fine. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to be happy, Alia cried, throwing her hands up. Because he chose you. He told me. He told me at the gala that you were his peace. He told me I was danger and you were safety. How could I take that away from you? How could I be the villain who ruins the nice girl's happiness because I'm too messed up to let go? Jaiwon placed the sketchbook gently on the desk. She looked at the drawing of the man she thought she was falling for. She saw the love in the charcoal strokes, a love she would never receive from him. He doesn't love me, Alia, Jaiwon said softly. He does, Alia insisted, though it sounded like she was trying to convince herself. He cares about you. He protects you. Caring isn't love, Jaiwon said, wiping a tear from her cheek. He treats me like a fragile vase. He's gentle because he's afraid he'll break me. He holds back, but with you. She looked at Alia, her eyes sad but knowing. He looked at you like he wanted to break himself just to be near you. He looked at you like you were the only air in the room and he was suffocating. Jaiwon grabbed her bag. She felt a profound sense of loss, but beneath it, the strength of a woman who knew her own worth. I'm going to see him, she said. Jaiwon, don't. I'm not doing it for you, Alia. I'm doing it for me. I deserve to be loved by someone who is actually in the room with me, not someone who is staring at a door waiting for someone else to walk in. She walked past Alia. At the door, she paused. He's not safe, Alia. You were right about that, but safety isn't what he needs. And it's not what you need either. You two are a storm, and I'm just getting wet. She left. Alia stood alone in the office, looking at the sketch of the sleeping king, realizing that the walls she had built were crumbling down around her. Di-yun's penthouse was dark when the doorbell rang. He ignored it. He was sitting in his armchair, a glass of whiskey untouched on the table, staring at the city lights. The doorbell rang again, persistent. He checked the security feed. It was Jaiwon. He sighed, a heavy, bone-deep sound. He buzzed her up. When he opened the door, he expected her to be smiling. He expected the warmth he had come to rely on. Instead, she walked in with a face that was pale and set in grim determination. She didn't take off her coat. She stood in the foyer, refusing to enter his sanctuary. Jaiwan, is everything all right? Stop, she said. Her voice echoed in the large, empty space. Just stop, D, or whatever your name really is, Shadow King, CEO, I don't even know anymore. D unfroze. He closed the door slowly, the lock clicking shut. What are you talking about? I went to the gallery today, she said, turning to face him. I saw the drawing, the one Alia made of you sleeping, 6 months ago. D-Yun didn't need to ask which drawing. He knew. Alia had drawn him once, months ago, on a Sunday morning when the world felt quiet. He hadn't known she kept it. I see, he said. His voice dropped the facade. The gentleness vanished, replaced by the stoic mask of the king. He didn't try to lie. Why didn't you tell me? Jaiwan asked, her voice cracking. Why did you let me make a fool of myself? Let's double date. Isn't she nice? God, you must have been laughing at me. You and her with your secret history and me, the idiot in the middle. I never laughed at you, Dion said, stepping forward, his face serious. Jaiwan, you have to understand. Understand what? That I was a human shield. That you used me to hide from her. That I was just a distraction. I used you to save her, Dion roared. The shout shattered the silence. Jaiwan flinched, stepping back. It was the first time he had ever raised his voice at her. Di-Yun ran a hand down his face, struggling for control. He looked broken. If I am with her, she is a target, he explained, his voice shaking with the weight of his confession. My life, it is not like yours, it is violent, it is ugly. Alia almost died because of me. I couldn't let that happen again, so I left. I found you. You were safe. You were light, I thought. I thought if I stood in the light long enough, the shadows would go away. I thought if I was with someone good, I could be good. Jaiwan looked at him with pity. That was the worst part. Not anger, pity. Safety isn't love, Dee, she whispered. And you can't use a person as a flashlight. It's not fair to me, and it's cruel to her. She took off the silver ring she wore, a gift he had given her last week. She placed it on the console table. It made a sharp clink against the glass. You don't want peace, she said. You think you do, but you don't. You want the fire, you're just too much of a coward to burn. You'd rather freeze to death with me than risk burning with her. She opened the door. Goodbye, Di-Yun. I hope you find the courage to be who you are. She walked out. Di-Yun stood there, looking at the ring. He was alone again. The silence rushed back in, filling the penthouse. But this time, it wasn't a refuge. It was a prison cell of his own making. The vacuum left by the collapse of the fake relationships didn't last long. Nature abhors a vacuum, and in Di-Yun's world, vacuums were filled by threats. 2 days later, the blow landed. It wasn't a bullet, it was a letter. Alia was at the gallery, trying to focus on inventory, when a courier delivered a sleek black envelope. Inside was a legal notice. Obsidian Estates, the parent company that owned her building, was terminating her lease effective immediately. Reason: violation of morality clause. Attached were photos. Photos of Leo from months ago, photos of the police raid, and fabricated reports linking the Curo collection to money laundering operations for a rival syndicate. It was a lie, a meticulously crafted lie. But in the court of public opinion, the lie traveled faster than the truth. Within hours, her bank accounts were frozen. Pending investigation, the bank manager told her apologetically over the phone. We received a flag from the Regulatory Commission. Then the email came, not from a lawyer but from a private address. Leave Seoul by midnight Friday, or the investigation becomes a prosecution, and the gallery becomes a parking lot. It was signed with a single orchid emblem. The matriarch, Di-Yun's mother. She had found out. She knew the Hanwha deal was dead. She knew Jaiwan was out of the picture. She knew her son was vulnerable again, and she was removing the source of the vulnerability. She was treating Alia not as a person, but as a tumor to be excised. Alia sat in her office, the letter shaking in her hands. She had lost her boyfriend. She had lost her friend. Now they wanted to take her life's work. They wanted to erase her. Fear, cold and sharp, tried to take hold. Run, it whispered. Go back to London. Go back to New York. You can start over. You can find a nice man who doesn't come with death threats. Alia stood up. She walked to the mirror in the corner of her office. She looked at the woman staring back. The woman in the emerald dress. The woman who had grabbed a box cutter and faced down a hitman. The woman who had built this empire from nothing. She wasn't a civilian anymore. She was a soldier who had forgotten her rank. She was the woman who loved the king. She grabbed her coat. She grabbed the letter. She didn't run to the airport. She ran to the lion's den. The headquarters of the Han Group was a fortress of glass and steel in the center of the Gangnam district. It was imposing, terrifying, and impenetrable. Di-yun was in his office on the top floor, staring at the city, when his secretary buzzed in, panic in her voice. "Sir, there is a woman here," she says. The heavy mahogany doors burst open. Alia walked in. She wasn't wearing a gown. She wasn't wearing her gallery chic. She was wearing a trench coat and heavy combat boots, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked like fury incarnate. She marched across the room, past the stunned security guard who had failed to stop her, and slammed the letter down on his black marble desk. "Fix your mother, Di-yun, or I will." Di-yun turned slowly. He looked at the letter. He looked at her. He didn't look surprised. He looked relieved. He picked up the letter and read it in a glance. His face darkened, a thunderstorm rolling in behind his eyes. "She did this. She's trying to exile me," Alia spat, planting her hands on his desk and leaning in. "She froze my accounts. She's threatening to frame me for money laundering. She gave me until Friday to leave the country." Di-yun stood up. The air in the room dropped 10 degrees. I told her the Hanwha deal fell through because of compatibility. I kept your name out of it." "She knows, Di-yun. Mothers always know. She knows you're not sleeping. She knows you broke up with the therapist. She knows you're still obsessed with me. And she thinks if she cuts me out like a cancer, you'll go back to being her obedient little king." Di-yun walked around the desk. He stopped in front of her. He looked at her blazing eyes. "You should have run," he said softly. "Why didn't you run? You could have taken the out." "Because I am done running," Alia yelled, poking him in the chest hard. "I built that gallery. I built this life. I am not letting some old woman with a god complex take it away from me just because her son doesn't have the spine to stand up to her." Di-yun grabbed her hand, the one poking him. He held it against his chest. She could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic rhythm that matched her own. "I have a spine, Alia." "Then use it," she demanded, trying to pull away, but he held fast. "You say you want to protect me, then stop hiding me. Stop treating me like a dirty secret. Claim me, Di-yun, or let me go, but do not let me be destroyed in the crossfire of your family drama." Di-yun looked at her. He looked at the fire he had tried so hard to extinguish and realized it was the only thing keeping him warm. He realized that the safest place for her wasn't away from him, it was beside him. He let go of her hand. He walked to his desk and pressed the intercom. "Prepare the car," he ordered, "and call the board, emergency session, mandatory attendance." "What are you doing?" Alia asked, breathless, rubbing her hand where he had held it. "The board of directors meeting is in 1 hour," Di-yun said, putting on his jacket. He checked his reflection, straightening his tie. "My mother will be there. She is expecting me to apologize for the failed Hanwha merger. She is expecting me to ask for a new match. And I am going to disappoint her." He walked to the door and held it open. He looked at Alia, not with the sad eyes of a man saying goodbye, but with the intense, terrifying focus of the man who had pinned her against the wall in the penthouse. "Are you coming?" Alia didn't hesitate. She walked through the door. The boardroom was silent. 12 elderly men in gray suits sat around the long oval table. At the head sat Madame Han. She was small, elegant, wearing traditional silk, and radiated a power that made the air thin. When Di-yun walked in, she smiled thinly. It was a smile of victory. "You are late, my son." Di-yun didn't sit. He stood at the end of the table. "I have an announcement regarding the future of the Obsidian Group." Madame Han gestured for him to continue, sipping her tea. "We are listening. I assume you have reconsidered the union with the Samsung heiress. It would be wise to secure our alliances." "No," Di-yun said. The room murmured. Papers shuffled. "I am restructuring the leadership protocols," Di-yun announced, his voice ringing like a bell. "And I am canceling all arranged marriage negotiations effective immediately." Madame Han's smile vanished. She set her cup down. Di-yun, do not be foolish. The family needs stability. You need a wife who brings capital, who brings honor. I have a partner, Di-yun said. He turned to the door. Alia. Alia walked in. She felt every eye in the room land on her like a physical weight. The judgment was instantaneous. Foreigner, outsider, problem. But she didn't shrink. She walked to Di-yun's side and stood there, her head high. This is Alia Kuro, Di-yun said. She is the owner of the Kuro collection, and she is the woman I am with. Madame Han stood up, trembling with rage. This is unacceptable. She is a liability, she is nothing. I have already taken steps to remove her from this city. I know, Di-yun said coldly. You froze her accounts, you threatened her. You abused company resources to harass a civilian. I did it for you, Madame Han cried, losing her composure. To save you from yourself. A king cannot rule with a weakness at his side. She makes you soft, she makes you reckless. Di-yun slammed his hand on the table. The sound cracked like a gunshot. The room jumped. She is not a weakness. He looked at his mother, his eyes blazing with a ferocity that terrified her. She is the only reason I am still standing. She is the only reason this family isn't rotting in the corruption I have spent 5 years cleaning up. You want a queen. A queen is not someone who sits quietly and pours tea. A queen is someone who runs into the fire when everyone else runs out. He reached out and took Alia's hand. He interlaced their fingers, lifting them for the board to see. The tattoo on his wrist, the vines, the thorns was stark against her skin. It was a visual declaration of war. If you touch her gallery again, Mother, if you send one more letter, one more threat, I will dissolve the trust. I will release the audit files I have been keeping on your offshore accounts. I will burn this company to the ground and build a new one on the ashes. The silence was absolute. The board members looked from the son to the mother, realizing the power had shifted. Do not test me, Di-yun warned. I will not have it. Madame Han sank back into her chair, defeated. She saw the look in his eyes. It was the look of a man who had nothing left to lose because he was holding everything that mattered in his hand. We are finished here, Di-yun said. He turned and walked out, Alia's hand firmly in his. They walked past the stunned secretaries, past the security guards, into the elevator. When the doors closed, enclosing them in the metal box, the adrenaline crashed. Alia leaned against the wall, her knees shaking. You threatened to burn the company down. I meant it, Di-yun said, loosening his tie. He let out a long breath, looking at the ceiling. He looked at her. The elevator was descending, but he felt like he was floating. You came for me, he whispered. You tried to erase me, she countered, though there was no heat in it anymore. You tried to send me away. I tried to save you. You didn't ask if I wanted to be saved. Di-yun stepped closer. The space between them vanished. He placed his hands on the wall on either side of her head, trapping her. It was a mirror of the night it all began, the penthouse, the rain, the interrogation. But the energy was different. It wasn't possessive fear. It was desperate devotion. I am asking now, he said, his voice rough. I cannot promise you safety, Alia. My mother will scheme. My enemies will watch. The war is not over. It will never be over. If you stay with me, you are a target. You will never be just a civilian again. Alia looked up at him. She saw the scars. She saw the tattoo. She saw the man who had tried to be a hero and realized he was human. She saw the love that terrified him. I don't want to be safe, Di-yun, she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. I want to be yours. Di-yun let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. He buried his face in her neck. Breathing her in, the scent of rain and vanilla that he had missed for every second of the last 6 months. Who am I to you? He asked, his lips brushing her pulse point, his voice vibrating against her skin. Alia closed her eyes, tilting her head back. She traced the vines on his neck with her thumb. You're the king, she said softly, and I'm the one who keeps you in line. The elevator doors opened to the lobby. Di-yun pulled back, though his eyes lingered on her lips. He straightened his jacket. He offered her his arm, a gesture of old-world respect. Shall we go home, he asked, to the penthouse? Alia took his arm. She felt the muscle beneath the suit, strong and steady. Let's go home, but Di-yun. Yes. If you ever lock me out again, I'm changing the locks. Di-yun smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. Understood. They walked out into the city. The rain had stopped. The air was clear. And for the first time in 6 months, the silence wasn't empty. It was full of promise. The cage is open. The king has his queen. Long may they reign.